Have you ever had a moment when someone looked at you in a way that shook you to your core? A look that didn't just see the surface, but saw through you to the parts of yourself you thought had disappeared forever. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 35 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood in North Carolina. I've been married for nearly a decade to my husband Richard, and on the outside, everything looks fine. We have a stable home, a routine life, and nothing dramatic ever happens here. But sometimes what looks fine on the outside feels empty on the inside. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like myself. I used to be vibrant, spontaneous, and full of life. Now, I was living on autopilot. Wake up, work, cook, clean, repeat. I had become invisible, even in my own marriage. That summer, everything changed when my stepson Ryan came to live with us. He had just turned 19. I'd known him since he was a boy, but we only saw him occasionally because he lived with his mother in another state. Now he was moving in for a few months before starting college. I expected it to be simple, a summer of adjustment, maybe a little awkward, but nothing unusual. But when Ryan walked through the door with his bags, I almost didn't recognize him. The shy, quiet boy I once knew was gone. He'd grown into someone taller, older, with an air of confidence that startled me. His smile was warmer, softer than his father's, and he carried himself differently, like he belonged wherever he went. I wasn't prepared for the way his presence changed the air in the house. At first, it was innocent. Ryan would sit in the kitchen while I cooked, asking me about work, listening to my stories. He noticed things that Richard never did: how I hummed under my breath when I chopped vegetables, how I bit my lip when I was thinking. It wasn't that he said much, but he noticed. And being noticed felt like breathing again after years of suffocating. One sweltering afternoon, I suggested he take a swim in the backyard pool. The heat was unbearable, and Richard was away on a business trip. I hadn't worn a swimsuit in years, but something in me wanted to feel alive again, even for a moment. So I slipped into one I had tucked away and stepped outside. Ryan was already in the water, leaning against the edge with his eyes closed. When he looked up and saw me, he smiled in that slow, unhurried way. "Didn't know you were coming out," he said. "Didn't want you to have all the fun," I replied, though inside my heart was racing. We swam, splashed, laughed like kids, and yet there was something else beneath the surface, something unspoken. At one point, his foot brushed against mine underwater. Neither of us moved. Neither of us said a word, but we both felt it. Later, when the sun was setting, he offered to help put sunscreen on my shoulders. It was a simple gesture, nothing more. But the quiet care in his touch left me unsettled. Not because it was wrong, but because it reminded me how long it had been since anyone had treated me like I mattered. That night, a storm rolled in. The power flickered, thunder shook the house, and Richard called to say his flight was delayed. I poured myself a glass of wine, trying to calm the storm in my chest that was louder than the one outside. Ryan walked into the living room, barefoot, hair damp from a shower, and sat down next to me. For a long time, we didn't speak. The silence was heavy, charged with something neither of us dared to name. Then he turned to me and asked, "Are you happy, Emily?" The question stopped me cold. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to smile and pretend. But the truth slipped out in a whisper. "I don't feel seen anymore." His eyes softened. "You are," he said quietly. "By me." Our hands brushed on the couch, lingering just long enough to make my breath catch. And when he leaned closer, the air between us thinned. He didn't kiss me, not that night. But the tension, the closeness, the way his eyes held mine, it was enough to change everything. The next morning, we acted as though nothing had happened. Breakfast was casual, conversations normal. But beneath every word was a current we couldn't ignore. We moved around each other like magnets, pulled together and pushed apart, always resisting, always drawn. A few days later, Richard came home earlier than expected. Ryan and I were in the kitchen, standing close, laughing quietly. When Richard walked in, his smile faltered for just a second. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said too quickly. That night, lying in bed beside my husband, Guilt pressed on me like a weight. Nothing had happened. Not really. But everything had already changed. Ryan and I started keeping our distance during the day. But at night, when the house was quiet, we'd find ourselves in the same room, on the porch, in the kitchen, sometimes just sitting in silence. We'd talk about music, books, old memories. The topics were simple, but the way he looked at me wasn't. His eyes said more than words ever could. One night, his voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I see you, even when you try to hide." And in that moment, I realized that what was happening wasn't about breaking rules or stepping over lines. It was about being seen again, about feeling alive again. Summer eventually ended. Ryan left quietly one morning before I woke up. His room was empty, the bed cold. On the kitchen counter was a note in his handwriting. "You deserve to feel alive. Don't forget that." Richard never asked questions. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he already knew. But sometimes when the house is still and I catch my reflection in the window, I think about that summer. About the way Ryan looked at me. About how, for the first time in years, I remembered who I was. It wasn't just about him. It was about me. About rediscovering the parts of myself I thought were gone forever. And that memory, complicated, fleeting, but real, still lingers like the echo of a storm long after it has passed.